scene at Buckingham Palace as this procession stretches now from Constitution Hill all the way back to Horse Guards. Representatives of the Army and the Royal Air Force and the Navy, the band of the Irish Guards and the Welsh Guards, this section of the parade. Procession makes its way onto the Mall. Queen Consort pointing out some of the elements of the procession to Prince George and Princess Charlotte, and the Princess of Wales looking on. There we have the Duchess of Sussex and the Countess of Wessex. Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie. Just at the back of this section, behind the King, caught a glimpse there we are, of Duke of Sussex, the Princess Royal, and her husband, Vice Admiral Timothy Lawrence, Duke of York, Gloucester, Lady Phillips. So many memories, those taking part in this procession from the royal family. And there we are, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, died 20 years ago, and King George VI, who died a relatively young man in his 50s. back in 1952, of course, meaning that the Queen came to the throne at the age of 25. And no question that King George VI was responsible for shaping this remarkable reign that we've seen over the past 70 years. Because Queen Elizabeth II has reigned very much within the parameters set for her by her father. A very close bond between them, as indeed there was between the Queen and her mother. Great rich mix of military heritage before our eyes. The Royal Marines, armed forces from the Commonwealth countries, the Household Cavalry, and among this part of the procession too, the heads of the armed forces. We spoke this morning to Admiral Tony Radakin, who's head of all the armed forces, and his hope that this procession would be impeccable and a fitting tribute to Her late Majesty, and I don't think anyone would question that. Blues and Royals, followed by the drum horse and the state trumpeter, as they make their way gradually towards Wellington Arch and Hyde Park Corner. And there we have the Commonwealth Memorial Gates with the flames, as we see the procession making its way towards this part of central London, which is near the gardens of Buckingham Palace, and what is normally a very busy section of Hyde Park Corner. Today it's solemn and silent for this funeral procession for the late Queen. The Honourable Artillery Company approaching, part of the great representation of the British Army in this procession. Flanking the Queen's coffin, on either side we have the bearer party from the Queen's Company, 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, and with the distinctive white plumes, the gentlemen at arms behind them, equally distinctive in their Tudor uniform, the Yeomen of the Guard. Of the band of the Scots Guards and Coldstream Guards, we have just about a view there of the Earl Marshal, gentleman in the glasses, the Earl Marshal, Duke of Norfolk, the man who's in charge of the organisation of state events, state funerals, coronations. It's a hereditary role. It's the 18th Duke of Norfolk. And he's the one who's shouldered a lot of the responsibility for making sure that this state funeral happens in accordance with Her late Majesty's wishes. Centre with the white plumes, we have the Major General commanding the Household Division, troops of the London District, Major General Christopher Geeker, who's in command of all the troops in procession today and elsewhere, lining the route and taking part, not just in the procession itself. Great funeral marches, so familiar of course, by Mendelssohn and Beethoven and Chopin. This state gun carriage, which has been in the Navy's care since 1901, was first reserved for the funeral of Queen Victoria more than a century ago, and has been used since then. It was the same state gun carriage used for the funeral of King George VI 70 years ago. Regiments of foot guards, their distinctive tunics, Welsh, Irish, Scots and Grenadiers, and the Coldstream Guards. Royal Lancers and the Royal Engineers also in the procession. This is the scene at Wellington Arch, which stands right in the middle of Hyde Park Corner. The ancient home of the Duke of Wellington nearby, and Wellington Arch named because of that connection. At one stage, the arch was planned as the main entrance to Buckingham Palace, but as with Marble Arch, things were changed at a later date. And this is where we will have a gathering of thousands of members of the armed forces for this final part of the ceremony in London, where the Queen's coffin will be transferred from that gun carriage to the state hearse, which will be waiting to take the Queen home to Windsor. Standing tall, just behind his father, the king, in the section of these young naval ratings. The Yeomen of the Guard, an important part of this procession for reasons of tradition, and then the Royal Company of Archers with their magnificent eagle feathers. The King's Bodyguard in Scotland. Deeply poignant moment in this procession as Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II approaches Buckingham Palace for the last time. September day, with touches of blue in the sky, the London skyline looking glorious in the background. And here we have what is, for the late Queen, her last glimpse of that famous balcony where she appeared on so many occasions, where she stood with her father and mother, King and Queen, at the end of the Second World War, joined by the vast crowds who were in the area we can see today. And the vast crowds again here when the young Queen was crowned back in 1953. Just ahead of the naval ratings were drawing the carriage. A very poignant moment for them because members of the Queen's household and her private secretary, part of this procession, now passing Buckingham Palace, their place of work, of course, along with Windsor and other royal residences, but Buckingham Palace was always the office. And here we have the staff of the palace. A great line of them standing in silence and respect as they wait for this procession to pass with the late Queen. And we think here of the four memorable jubilees during the reign. We look at that balcony and all the delight and joy and celebration of those times. Memories, of course, shared by the royal family and all of the royal household in today's procession, and millions watching wherever they're watching around the world who remember those occasions with equal joy. We look at the heart of the procession. We mentioned the royal bodyguards and the bearer party. Also there are the service equerries who have been part of the Queen's service. Leaving Buckingham Palace behind and slowly advancing towards Hyde Park Corner and that transfer in readiness for the journey to Windsor, a journey by road. In contrast to the events of 70 years ago, King George VI was taken in procession from Westminster Hall to Paddington Station. There was no service at Westminster Abbey. The service in full was at St George's Chapel, Windsor. King George made the journey from London to Windsor by train on the Royal train. But arrangements this time are different, and the decision was made to take the Queen from London to Windsor by road in the State Hearse. Procession passing just on the left there, the great gardens of Buckingham Palace, where so many of those garden parties took place over the years, thousands of them. The So many people being delighted to be asked, just once in most cases, to enjoy the gardens, and indeed, if they were fortunate, to have a few words with Her Majesty during the garden party itself. And then on the other side we have Green Park. Members of Her Majesty's household taking their part proudly in the procession. And still the sound of Big Ben tolling right across central London, punctuated with the sounds of the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery firing their long gun salute. And they've been based principally at Hyde Park for this firing today during this procession. That was at Hyde Park. There are two guns also being fired at Hyde Park Corner, dismounted guns, as part of this last formal section of this procession today in London, before a separate procession takes place at Windsor later on. Lining the route in this part, Royal Air Force. Vice Chamberlain and the Treasurer of the Royal Household, part of this group representing those who served Her Majesty. will touch the hearts of everyone watching, I'm sure. As we look at the close family, children of the late Queen, led by the King, grandchildren, as they know full well that within minutes it will be the moment for the late Queen to leave London and to head back home to Windsor. London, of course, the city of the Queen's birth. And we are just a matter of a few yards away here from the Queen's childhood home on Piccadilly. And not too far either from her birthplace in Mayfair. Magnificent view of Wellington Arch, with the greenery, right in this busy part of London. And all the armed forces formed up for this final ceremony. Carriage will be taken under the arch, and from there the transfer to the state hearse will take place. So many elements of strong tradition. What's about to happen from the gun carriage to the hearse? A piping party that we heard at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral last year. A very strong echo of the Duke of Edinburgh's life at sea. And of course, from the Queen's point of view, tribute to her late father, King George VI, and his experience during the First World War, the Battle of Jutland. So, very challenging experience at sea. And of course, the Duke of Edinburgh himself with his wartime service in the Second World War. Imperial state crown and the orb and sceptre will be part of the procession, and that royal standard which is draped over the Queen's coffin all the way to Windsor until that final committal takes place in St. George's Chapel. when those emblems of Her Majesty's authority will be set on the altar at St George's Chapel before the committal takes place. Under the arch they go. Her Majesty's coffin on that carriage to be sheltered under that arch. The transfer will take place. Moments that few of us will ever forget, I'm sure. National anthem played as Her late Majesty was taken from Wellington Arch and is now on the way to Windsor after a very moving service at the Abbey and some clearly expressed messages, including those of the Archbishop of Canterbury, about the Queen's life of service and dedication, a sense of duty, and then the magnificent, solemn, moving procession all the way from the Abbey to Wellington Arch. And there are crowds on the streets here approaching Knightsbridge, lots of them offering floral tributes, others just maintaining a dignified silence, come to see their Queen for the last time as she leaves London. Katie Nicholl and Robert Hardman are still. Katie, as we see the Queen's final departure from the capital, I suspect that these are the images that will stay with people for many years to come.
I don't think anyone that watched that, Hugh, will ever forget it. And you said during your commentary, so many memories. And that's what struck me as I watched that procession past those landmarks that have punctuated the Queen's life and punctuated ours, because we look forward to Trooping the Colour and those birthday parades. You know, I look at my life and it's been marked by the silver, the diamond, the gold, all these wonderful jubilees. And I can't help but think back to the Platinum Jubilee celebrations and the last time that the Queen stepped out on that balcony. And I think if anyone's wondering, what must she make of all of this? Remember when she stepped out for the last time, overwhelmed with emotion, at that sea of faces, that sea of people there for her. Well, today they turned out again to bid a final farewell.
They did, Robert, and the sense of love and respect and admiration is just as strong as the sense of loss.
It is, Hugh. I thought it was rather touching. We saw just a few moments ago almost a ghost of a smile on the face of the King as he saw the end of this extraordinary ceremony, because it's been a spectacular and as we said earlier, unprecedented gathering of not just world leaders but of all these armed forces from around the world. This is a ceremony unlike anything, really, as you said earlier, since the funeral of George VI, possibly since the coronation. And it's all gone exactly as the Queen would have wanted. She was she paid a great deal of attention to all of this, and she would have been so pleased to see it just go the way it's gone. And I think the wonderful contrast between the solemnity and the formalities we had a little earlier, and now just look at the Capitol coming out. I mean, they are 20, 30, 40, 50 deep in places, the whole of Hyde Park, and now this is the sort of the on her way to the other part of all of this, which will be, I think, rather more intimate.
Last night it was a glorious rainbow over London when we were preparing for today, and today it's a sunny day in September, and crowds really have come out in there, many thousands. And the sunshine has added to the sense of colour and vibrancy. It's been solid but not gloomy. This is the issue, because, as so many people have said, a life of 96 years is something to be celebrated. Of course, the Queen will be missed, but people understand that there's a lot here that needs to be said about everything that was achieved over that long lifetime, and that's really why I think that people have wanted to come out. It's a mark of thanks as well, not just of admiration. It's saying thank you as well as farewell.
It is, Hugh, and I suspect had it been pouring with rain, everyone that's standing out there today would still have done it in all weather.
It would be very British.
It would be terribly British, but I think the fact that as the coffin left the Abbey and the clouds parted and the sun came down, it was a wonderful moment to see that spectacle bathed in sunshine, and those rainbows that you point out, I think, struck so many people. The double rainbow over Buckingham Palace, the rainbow over Windsor Castle. I think we'll all be looking out for a rainbow later on today.
Indeed we will. And as you were saying, Robert, we're in a position where we are reflecting what's gone on today, but of course we're also looking ahead to the final part of this state funeral. And these people are clearly out to say goodbye and thank you for all you've done.
They are, and here we see Her late Majesty coming past the memorial to Prince Albert, that extraordinary memorial, 150 years old this year, the Albert Memorial, which Queen Victoria spent so much love on. I mean, it makes you think, what on earth are we going to put up to commemorate this extraordinary monarch who is leaving the capital for the last time? But everything about today, there was a sort of timelessness to it. I thought you saw the troops massing in front of Wellington's old house at Hyde Park Corner. It sort of could have been the 19th century. I mean, and yet we have all these sort of modern aspects to it. It's been a brilliant blend of ancient and modern today, and there is 21st century Britain saluting really one of the greats.
It's a wonderful parallel, isn't it, to be passing the Royal Albert Hall, because of course all those years that the Queen was determined to attend the Festival of Remembrance on Remembrance Weekend, the eve of the Remembrance service at the Cenotaph. The buzz among 5,000 people in that hall when she arrived at just before 7 o'clock on Saturday evening was remarkable, with people really feeling that the Queen's authority and the Queen's blessing on what was happening was indispensable. It wasn't the same event, and isn't the same event, won't be the same event without her, although of course the King will, and already has impressed lots of people with the way that he's...
Everyone wanted an imprimatur on these events. And wasn't it wonderful the way the procession took in almost all the great memorials, all the way through, not just the Cenotaph and the Women at War, but up to Hyde Park Corner. There's the New Zealand War Memorial, the Australian War Memorial. I mean, every aspect of shared sacrifice, I think, has been recognised today through this exemplary procession.
I was really struck as well, Katie, by the way in which the procession, the initial procession, which arrived at the Abbey in silence, a sense of expectation but deep respect. The service itself really did underline lots of the themes that Her Majesty wanted to have underlined. She was, of course, a woman of strong faith.
She
And
was.
it had informed lots of the decisions that she'd made in her life and the way that she'd lived her life.
I think you're absolutely right, and we saw the faith reflected in that service with some of her favourite hymns.
Yes.
And readings that date back to the coronation. Everything had been so carefully considered and thought out, and punctuated with the most important things in her life: her faith, the armed forces, her family, her people. It's all there, and I think also that sense that yes, we have lost something very, very special to all of us. This is a testimony to that. But in all of this, as Robert says, the tradition and the history and the landmarks and everything that's wrapped into this is the promise of the new. It's the continuity. We've seen that in the past 11 days, extraordinary days, and how the new king has been welcomed. But we saw that in the procession with Prince George and Princess Charlotte.
Yes.
That promise of the future, that promise of what's next to come. And I think that's reassuring, particularly at the moment.
Yes.
The presence of Princess Charlotte there, a reminder of some of the extraordinary changes that the late Queen made during her reign. I mean, it was only in 2011 she changed hundreds, thousands of years of male primogeniture, so that the line of succession has changed. All these little, that's so much. I mean, when historians look back on this reign, they'll see so many small ways in which, very quietly but very firmly, she completely transformed this institution. And I also love the way today that the procession, it wasn't just about recognizing her. I mean, obviously clearly it was, but in her way, when she organized it, she wanted to recognize others. I thought the way in which she placed the Victoria Cross and the George Cross holders right at the front of that procession, for example, that was so her. The George Cross, the great decoration invented by her father at the height of the war. All these little things. There's a lot of nods, I think, to her parents in that.
And to the Commonwealth,
the
Mounties. I mean, it was all there, down to the NHS workers and everyone that helped us through the pandemic.
Most recent recipients of the George Cross, of course, the NHS.
Last word then from us before we go to our colleagues at Windsor for the next phase of the day. And Katie, you first of all, it's impossible to start really assessing neatly and credibly this remarkable reign so early on. Distinguished authors both, it's a challenge to do something like that. Do you feel that today will have helped people maybe turn the page, to just realise that great change is happening?
Yes.
And that they can take that on board? Is today the day when people will be helped in that direction?
I think so. I think this is the moment that completes 11 extraordinary days, and you could plan and rehearse and dress rehearse and do it all over again. You couldn't predict how the public were going to respond, what the mood would be. It's been phenomenal, but this is closure today, and I think back to what the Queen said in her very first broadcast when she was a little girl during the Blitz: all will be well, because it will.
Robert, is today the day when that happens? Because it's been 10 days of people really trying to come to terms with such a momentous change in public life and in personal lives.
I think what we've seen today, we have seen the embodiment of greatness from the world leaders gathered to what we're seeing now, an entire nation coming out. This is greatness in our time, and that greatness is really down to this extraordinary monarch, her life shaped by three people in particular: her father, her darling father, her beloved mother, and of course her beloved Philip. And I just think it is so powerful that here she is, she's on her way, and after all this grandeur and greatness, tonight she'll be reunited with them for eternity.
Well, we are looking at the progress of the procession of the State Hearse to Windsor, to the Royal Town of Windsor, where the final committal will take place a little later this afternoon, and our coverage continues. We will be following the journey, Queen's last journey out of London, to her home at Windsor Castle, and then we'll be following the new procession that will take place at Windsor, and of course the service at St. George's Chapel. And as we look at the vehicles making their way, and the State Hearse in particular, you can see the bright colours of the Royal Standard and the crown and the orb and sceptre telling everyone along the way that this is Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, a Christian of conviction who, more than anyone, understood the message of the preacher, which is that there is a time and season to all things, a time to be born and a time to die. Queen understood that as part of the natural rhythm of life and the natural transition of the great constitution that she's upheld over many, many years. She's returning home to Windsor. Let's join Kirsty Young.
Yes, and so the grand and exquisite ceremonial tableau of that magnificent state occasion gently recedes into the background as the Queen's coffin makes its way now through London and out towards Windsor. Welcome to the splendour of Windsor Castle, the near 1,000-year-old home of royalty and the backdrop to many great battles and grand banquets. But today sees maybe its most momentous event, the burial of our longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen will this afternoon finally be laid to rest in St George's Chapel alongside her beloved parents, sister and husband. So many days of grand public ceremony will come to an intimate ending as Her Majesty passes into history. We'll see the Queen's coffin making its journey towards Windsor and the committal service, which will be attended by the King, the rest of the royal family, and also Her Majesty's closest friends. Windsor Castle is certainly exquisitely grand and imposing, but it's also a place where the Queen, and then of course the little princess, played as a toddler on the lawn, found safety as a teenager during the Blitz, rode her ponies, nursed her children, walked her dogs. Having left her cherished home in the Scottish Highlands 11 days ago, today she will come to rest for eternity in the home that was so important it gave name to her family. Well, the town of Windsor is, of course, a major tourist destination. It's used to crowds, but today its streets have taken on a unique character. The grounds of the chapel and the edges of the Long Walk are carpeted with bouquets of flowers. And the thousands of visitors, some local and many more from far-flung corners of the globe, are quietly positioning themselves to take one last look at Her Majesty's coffin. David Dimbleby will be taking us through this afternoon's event.
I suppose the way to see this afternoon's service is that if what happened at Westminster Abbey was the grandeur of a state funeral with heads of state, with people from all over the world coming to pay tribute to Her late Majesty, what is going to happen here at Windsor this afternoon is much closer to a family funeral. As Kirsty was saying, the Queen is going to be interred here along with the Queen Mother, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, Princess Margaret, and will lie with 10 other sovereigns going way back to Henry VI in 1471. So it is in that sense the sovereign coming back to the place where our sovereigns, or many of our sovereigns, lie. But on the other hand, the congregation is going to be very different here, as the people sitting here now are perfectly obvious were not in Westminster Abbey. They've assembled here, and they are a different kind of congregation, much smaller. They include, for instance, many of the Queen's godchildren. They include large numbers of people who worked on the Queen's estates, whether in Scotland or in Norfolk or in London. Some of them wearing, you see that little medal, the Royal Victorian Order, which several people here are wearing, and that's the order that's in the personal gift of the Queen, only given to people who have worked for her, and it's her decision whether they should have it. So what we'll see here is a quite different service, but with this momentous ending to it, which Hugh was talking about earlier on, the moment when the instruments of monarchy that were presented to her in Westminster Abbey at the coronation are removed from the top of the coffin and returned to those 3 cushions you can just see in the far distance on the altar of St. George's Chapel. The banners, of course, here are of the Royal Order of the Garter, hanging splendidly all the way down. The Garter Knights, who each have to provide the banner, there are 24 of them in all, and members of the royal family as well. So this chapel not only serves the purpose of being the Chapel of Windsor, but also of the Order of the Garter, founded in 1348 by Edward III. So history here, just as in Westminster Abbey, history here is present for this momentous afternoon.
Well, I'm joined now in our studio by the very well-known face, the gardener and broadcaster, Alan Titchmarsh. Thank you very much for taking the time, especially since this is a personal day for you too, because you knew the Queen, you met her on very many occasions. What are your thoughts today as you've watched, as we've all watched, almost spellbound by some of those images?
I've been so moved, Kirsty, by the fact that we've all come together, as she said we would, and we must. And there's been this enormous sense of togetherness created for us by our late Majesty, the Queen. And the fact that the streets were so lined, that Westminster Abbey was full of the great and the good, but we were there too, in spirit and in many thousands in person. And she has pulled us all together over the years. And I've felt also an enormous sense of continuity. We all thought, oh my goodness me, what will happen when the Queen goes? The Queen has gone, and yet we're still here. She would have wanted us to be. We now have a king who has taken up the reins seamlessly, spoken beautifully right the way through. And I feel safe. I feel as though we have all come together to say we're all right. You know, it will be okay. She gave us 70 years on the throne. We've learned from her. We will not disappoint her. We will carry on. We will be positive, and we will remember her with enormous fondness and respect.
I was wondering what you were making of, to me, although of course a state occasion, and indeed there will never be a grander one than that, but I was looking at the wreath on the coffin, so full of colour. I saw rosemaries, hydrangeas, there were dahlias, oak leaves. It seemed to me it was a very, very personal touch, and I just wondered, you, with your gardener's eye, what you made of that.
Our history was in that wreath. There
Right.
were oak leaves there. There are oak trees in Windsor Great Park that were growing here and were mature when William the Conqueror invaded in 1066. Some of them are still there, still alive. And it's Hearts of Oak, isn't it, that famous military song? The oak leaves, rosemary, as you say, for remembrance, English roses. And the Prince of Wales, as you know, as I know, is a great gardener. And it was his wreath there, his message on there to his mother, who was also a keener gardener than most people would realise.
I didn't know that. I didn't know
She loved small flowers. Lily of the Valley was her favourite flower. She loved primroses. The sort of humble flowers in a way, rather like Queen Alexandra, who was Edward VII's queen. She liked what she called her poor little flowers, really small little flowers. And it was a great reminder that one of the lasting great legacies from the Queen was the Queen's green canopy.
Yes.
That carries on. It is of small consolation to me that the first words my sovereign ever spoke to me in 1985 at the Chelsea Flower Show, when I needed a cottage garden, she said to me, first time she'd ever spoken, I'd ever met her, she said, your onions are very small. And she must have seen I was crestful. She went on to say, I like them small. When they're large, they taste of nothing at all.
She's quite right. Bracingly frank then. What about what she gave you your MBE when you got
She
your
did.
MBE? And people always say, well, you know, I don't really talk about what she said. Well, maybe now, maybe today is the day to talk about what she said. What was the conversation?
Well, I'd had the great joy. It was 2000. It was the millennium, New Year honours, and I'd been given the MBE. And in that January, when I knew I'd got it, I was asked to go to Sandringham to talk to the Sandringham WI. Only about 25 members, and the Queen in the front row. And I remember standing up to address this AGM. The Queen was right in front of me, and I said, oh man, we're awfully close, aren't we? And so she took over the table, the trestle table, and she said, yes, you pull, I'll push. And then I had a lovely time. You know, when you can make the Queen laugh, or when you could make the Queen laugh, and she threw her head back, it was genuine laughter, and the smile that we all know. And then when I came to my investiture in June, I thought, well, I wonder if she'll say anything about it. And I went up and went to my bow, and she said, are you busy? I thought, I was a bit disappointed, it was a bit general, but I thought, no, she sees a lot of people, she can't remember everything. And I told her what I was doing, television and writing. And at the end, the hand came out, and she shook my hand. She said, you give a lot of ladies a lot of pleasure.
She never did.
Well, I didn't really realise until somebody said what to me. So what did she say? And I said, she said, what? And so I was going home in the car with my wife, and I said, I couldn't make up my mind whether to be buried or cremated. I'd quite like to be buried because I'd like a headstone. And on me said, like Alan Titchmarsh, MBE, 1949 to whatever. He gave a lot of ladies a lot of pleasure, Elizabeth R.
Well, she wasn't wrong, was she, Alan?
No.
Extraordinarily, you saw, as he was then, Prince Charles, the night before he was about to become king. A normal night, a special night. It must have presumably been a special night. Prince Charles was there.
It was at Dumfries House up in Ayrshire, and I've been an ambassador for the Prince's Trust and Prince's Countryside Fund for a long time. I've also been, since its formation, an ambassador for the Prince's Foundation, which does a huge amount of work, and particularly up in that part of Scotland and around Dumfries House. 12,000 people a year learning all kinds of skills. And I was up there to have a look round, and I saw the Prince in the morning and ran across the ladder and said hello, and we had a quick chat, and he said, perhaps you could do the estate walk with me tomorrow, which, as it turned out, I couldn't do, but it's another story, isn't it? But we had a dinner in the evening, and it was about 50 people there, so it was quite intimate. And after dinner, we had coffee, and we listened to music. There was a sort of penny whistle and a guitar, and the Prince gave the penny whistle player a bottle of scotch and the guitarist a bottle of champagne. And we all chatted, and at about 11 o'clock, the Prince was working his way around the room to leave. And I happened to be standing by the door, and he shook my hand. He said, come for tea sometime. I said, love. I've known him for a long time. And off he went to bed, and off I went to bed, and I got an early flight in the morning. When I got home, I realised that I'd said goodnight to the King on his last night as Prince of Wales. He had no inkling that night before that anything was untoward.
We're looking at pictures now of the Queen's coffin making its way, as I said, towards Windsor, and we can see there isn't a gap, really. People have come out from their homes, their places of work, if they happen to be working today on this bank holiday, and they are very much making their presence felt. And I think, we saw how deep the crowds were in central London. It's no surprise.
It's no surprise at all. It's wonderful that people want to be there, as all those hundreds of thousands who filed through Westminster Hall just wanted to be there, to pay their respects, to say thank you. It's a celebration of a life, as well as a mourning of a passing of a very, very important person to all of us.
Alan Titchmarsh, thank you very much for sharing your wonderful memories and your thoughts on such an important day.
Thank you.
People are gathering on the long walk. Anita Rani is there for us.
I was here last night, Kirsty, and a few people were gathering to bag their spots, to spend their night under the stars to make sure that they got a good position. And what a difference now. The crowds have amassed, all here with one common goal: to witness a moment in history, to watch the procession of Her Majesty the Queen's coffin make the final part of its journey along the Long Walk through to Windsor Castle via the Cambridge Gate, which is behind me. The crowds have come well prepared. They've come with picnics and blankets and chairs, and they've been watching the funeral service on screens that have been erected along the Long Walk. And during the service, it was pin drop silence. And then everybody rose to their feet during the national anthem. The atmosphere here is calm, it's contemplative, it's reflected, it's very peaceful. And the weather gods are smiling on us today. It was warm and overcast this morning, and now the sun has come out. And the people here are from all over the country, all walks of life, young and old, and locals from Windsor as well. Some of them who were lucky enough to meet the Queen, who was very much their neighbour, and I'll be hearing their stories a little bit later.
With me now, watching events unfold today, is the very eminent historian, Sir David Cannadine. We're very happy to have you here. Why Windsor? Why does it end here for Queen Elizabeth II?
It ends here because Windsor is the oldest royal residence of the royal family, going back to Norman times. And more recently, and there's a long perspective here, it's the place where all British monarchs have been buried since George III. Most of them, not all of them, in the chapel here, but all of them within the wider curtilage of Windsor. So It is the place where monarchs finally come to rest. And in the sequence of monarchs, it's now Queen Elizabeth's turn.
Can we draw any conclusions from the fact? I think people very often, when they visit Windsor, when they think of Windsor, they think of Queen Victoria. They see the wonderful statue that's in the centre of Windsor, and of course the mausoleum is here, this grand mausoleum that was built near Frogmore Cottage. Yes, near Frogmore. Our longest serving monarch of 70 years doesn't seem to be doing anything that is quite as much of a statement as that. She will be laid to rest in the very intimate privacy of the family crypt. That tells us something about, or does it tell us something about her?
Well, Windsor Castle is a very multifunctional place. It's important to remember that. It began as a fortress. It's a royal home. It's where many members of the royal household work. It has a fabulous library and art collection, and it's a place of worship. So lots of things go on in Windsor, but one of the great things that goes on, which is why we're here today, is that this is where monarchs end their lives and are buried here. Queen Elizabeth, of course, herself had a strong personal connection with Windsor, probably stronger than many monarchs before her, so there are many reasons why it's very fitting that she ends here.
Do you think the strong connection particularly being the teenage years during the war, which really sort of cemented, would it be fair to say, cemented her relationship with the place?
I think it would. Of course, even before that, she spent weekends and time at Royal Lodge when her father was Duke of York, and that's where she acquired her love of country living and dogs and horses. But then, of course, she did live here with Princess Margaret during the Second World War. She made her first broadcast from here, and I think that was a very influential phase in her life. When she became monarch, she spent weekends here during the time that she was at Buckingham Palace during the week, and a variety of events are built around Windsor, the Garter ceremony, for example, Ascot Week, and of course a great deal of royal pageantry goes on here, state occasions when she welcomed people like President Obama or Donald Trump or Joe Biden. So she was very closely associated with here during her very long reign.
Can we think then about today as the moment when the Queen slips from being the person who was our monarch into history, as it were? You know, she is somebody who people will now be reading about. That's a very significant moment, of course, for her family and friends, but in a way it's a shared moment for all of us.
Yes, I think that's right. And in a way, it's a moment that will actually linger. It is true that she is passing from being our queen, and most of us never knew the time when there was any other monarch. She has now passed into history. We have a new sovereign, King Charles III. But of course it's true, firstly, that I think many people will remember this day all their lives. But secondly, it's going to take quite a while for my colleagues, historians and biographers, to reach some settled verdict on many aspects of her reign. We know already it was a remarkable reign. She was a great monarch and was much loved. All of that we know and is settled. But how future generations, future historians will come to see her is, I think, something that will need a lot of work on going forward.
It is very interesting that she maintained entirely consistently, as I understand it, the popularity of the monarchy throughout her reign. The figures were always the same. You know, people very much liked her when she came to the throne and very much like her today. It's interesting that as times have changed, and in many ways, she was a monarch managing decline of an empire, decline of Britain's status in the world in so many ways, and yet every overseas paper that I got my hands on this morning, on its very front page was the fact that today was the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. It's interesting that there's a sort of tension between those two things, do you think?
Yes, I think that's right. It's clear that in many ways she presided over a period of de-imperialisation, for want of a better word.
It's a good word.
And de-Victorianisation, if you'd like that one as well. And part of her skill at managing that was that she never let on that that was what she was doing.
Yes.
And I think that was crucially important. Yet at the same time as those things were happening, she helped the monarchy adapt. Some thought too slowly, some thought too quickly. I think on the whole she called it right. And I think the recognition that she managed to sustain all of that over 70 years was a very extraordinary achievement. Just as is also the fact that, although we like to think to the contrary, over 70 years she sustained the fact that with very, very few exceptions, we never really knew what she thought about anything.
Isn't that true? And that's so often when I speak to people, indeed at the Jubilee I spoke to many people to try to get an insight. But I suppose it's understandable that somebody who was so constantly under scrutiny would want very firmly to keep part of their life private.
I think that's right, and the hope must be, I speak here of course as a historian, the hope must be that she did indeed keep a diary, which I think there is cause to suppose that she did, and let us hope that she expressed her views there trenchantly and candidly in a way that in public she very properly felt she couldn't.
So interesting to talk to you, Sir David Cannadine. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to share your thoughts with us.
It's been a great pleasure and privilege.
Thank you.
On its way from London to Windsor, the coffin of the Queen carried past large crowds on each side of the road here. Quite extraordinary that in the centre of London people were kept away from the procession. They're making up for it by coming here in their thousands, not just here but at Windsor, down the Long Walk, on each side. This is the road that runs right the way down from the castle to a statue in the far distance. You can just see on the skyline of George III. And Queen Anne had it paved for a carriage. Each side, it looks as though those are flower beds. They're not flower beds. They're flowers that have been laid by the gardeners of Windsor, that have been brought here by thousands of people over the last few days. They've been coming up the hill to the castle, each carrying just a small bouquet, obeying orders, not having it wrapped in cellophane or anything like that, and placing them here, and then the gardeners putting them into a pattern so they look like a planted garden, with sunflowers particularly strong for this time of year. The gates at the bottom are the Cambridge Gate, and this part is private, and this is where the coffin will be brought up towards the castle itself. And when it reaches the top, the Queen, the King and other members of the royal family will join the coffin of the Queen and accompany it at half-mast. The royal standard never flies at half-mast. It's being hoisted to the top of the flagpole to show that King Charles has just arrived. It was at half-mast when it was the Union flag before, but it stays there while the King is present. And so they will walk down through to what's called the lower ward, to St. George's Chapel itself, where the service will take place. And as they come up that long walk, you'll hear a minute gun firing, just as it was in London. The Royal Horse Artillery firing a gun every minute, and 5 seconds after the gun fires, 2 bells ring. One from the chapel itself, just below the chapel, and the other a famous bell called the Sebastopol bell. It was captured in the Crimean War and only rings for moments like this. It last rang in 2002 for the death of the Queen Mother, and it rang again this week for the death of Her Majesty the Queen. So the route liners are in place. We're waiting now for the arrival of the coffin, and there will be a long procession past those thousands we saw on the Long Walk.
Well, someone who knows Windsor Great Park very well and was looking closely at those beautiful images is the equestrian event organiser Simon Brooks Ward. And it's not just the Great Park, but indeed the Queen herself that you knew very well and you worked closely with throughout the years on the Windsor Horse Show. You are going to the service today. You are that good a friend, and therefore we're very grateful that you've taken the time on what I'm sure is a very difficult day for you. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've been 1 or 2 interviews over the last week or so, and you know, every time I come away, I can't believe I'm talking in the past tense about the Queen. Even now, I have trouble thinking that the Queen is finally gone, and I hope that this afternoon there'll be time for reflection and a little bit of closure and also understanding it and grieving as well.
Over the past days, of course, what we hear so often is she was a country woman at heart, and we try to, in a way, get to the bottom of that. And one of the ways to unpack it, of course, is her relationship with horses, the equestrian fraternity. It all began with a little pony called, was it Peggy?
Peggy.
Tell me a bit about Peggy.
Well, Peggy is a little Shetland pony, and as we know, they can be either great or they can be really curmudgeonly. And I think Peggy was okay actually, but she had a really big instructor called Sybil Smith, who was one of these sort of redoubtable women who got the Queen riding and interested in ponies from the very beginning. And that connection, you know, with an animal like a horse or a pony, it doesn't matter whether you're a queen or a pauper or whatever, it's the connection. They don't know it, and the Queen had a wonderful connection with horses.
And I wonder, maybe, Simon, that was really at the root of it, because horses and dogs, she loved horses and dogs, and of course they just met her on the same terms as they met any human being. You know, they weren't looking at the crown, they weren't looking at the orb and the sceptre. She was just another human being, and I wonder maybe if therein lay part of the attraction for her.
Absolutely, it was simple pleasures, and you know, when you're getting away from matters of state and you're dealing with your dogs or your horses or the surroundings it was tremendously relaxing for the Queen, and that's what we saw at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. Absolutely, the total relaxation for the Queen to come down and see her horses and ponies, which she did for 79 years.
79 years?
Yeah.
She never missed one?
Never missed one, and was there most days. And recently, the State Opening in Parliament happened on the Wednesday. Well, I don't know how the Queen did it, but the Queen took off the crown, the robes of state and everything else, and was here by lunchtime to see her ponies in the ring. It was amazing.
And she was a very accomplished horsewoman herself. Is it true, and I've read this and I've never been able to check it out with anybody else, I guess you're the person to ask, was she still riding her fell ponies into her early 90s?
Oh yes.
That's true?
Yes, it's true. And the Queen was a fantastic horsewoman and person, and I always say that nobody knows or knew as much about a horse or a pony than the Queen. She had an incredible encyclopedic memory about horses and what breeding lines and bloodlines and everything else.
So she loved them. Did they love her? Was the feeling mutual?
Oh yeah. We all knew that the Queen was not very tall, and sometimes these big horses are not well behaved. Sometimes, but with the Queen, she absolutely commanded them, and it was done because it was relaxed. She stood there, she stood her ground, and the Queen tended to have this relationship, which is extraordinary. It was almost horse whispering.
Really?
Yeah, it was amazing to see the Queen around horses.
June, of course, means Ascot, and she was a devoted attendee of Ascot. It's interesting to think about the work that she did. I mean, obviously, it was enjoyment for her, but she brought the racing fraternity really into the spotlight, and we have, I guess, the amount of overseas money and the people who are very interested and want to be part of horse racing because they associate it with something dignified and something wonderful, and they associate it with the monarchy. She did a lot for the industry of racing.
Industry of racing, industry of horses and ponies. I mean, the Queen didn't just have a horse and see it race. The Queen knew about its journey, you know, from foal to the winning post. And that gave a great sense of accomplishment and pleasure for the Queen. And it was the same with the horses and ponies. And I always say to people that there are rare breeds in ponies and horses. And she was responsible for saving at least 7 through her patronage and support that we now see today not only survive, but they're thriving as well, like the Highland pony.
Now, never mind winning the Gold Cup with Estimate in 2013. I hear she liked to win the Rosettes at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. She was chuffed, wasn't she, when she got one?
Really great pleasures. And I remember wandering up to the Queen, and she just stood there in her blue gilet and a headscarf and sensible shoes and a tweed skirt.
Good woman.
And you know, so she was pretty incognito. And I remember wandering up to one ring, and she'd had a real sort of blue ribbon day, because you hauled out this load of rosettes out of her pocket and said, "Simon, look what I've won!" And you know, she was so pleased, and her smile was radiant. And she put them on her dining room table every night. Every time she won a cup at Royal Windsor Horse Show or a rosette, she put it on the dining room table.
Simon Brooks Ward, we are very grateful for you sharing those wonderful, intimate memories. We will let you go now to St George's Chapel. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you very much indeed.
I am with not just any old Windsor family, 6th generation Windsor family. Geoffrey, lovely to see you.
Thank you very much.
You're 90 now, but during the war, you got a very special invite to Windsor Castle, didn't you?
I did, yes, absolutely. I was invited
to go and see
the pantomime.
the pantomime.
Oh yes, yeah, the pantomime. I went to see the pantomime, which was absolutely amazing. It was fantastic.
How old were you?
I was 8 years of age.
8 years old. And who was in the pantomime?
The pantomime, well, I want to call them Princess Elizabeth and Princess Anne.
Margaret.
Princess Margaret.
We're with you. Well, there were princesses then.
Yeah, they were the princesses, that's right. Because it's a long time ago, but I think I'm probably the only person that's ever been to there, because I was taken, and I was so enthusiastic about it because it was so wonderful. I went round and picked up the programs, and I talked to the princesses, and they talked to me.
What did you talk about? Do you remember?
Yes, they just said, "Hi, what are you doing? How are you about?" And I said, "Well, did you enjoy doing it?" And they said, "Oh, absolutely, we loved it."
What a lovely
Yeah,
memory and
it
an
was.
experience. Can we see the mementos that you've got in
Yes,
your
surely.
hand? So what do we have here? We've got tickets
Yes.
to see Aladdin
Yeah.
and a letter sent, and your tickets came in this letter. How did you manage to get the tickets?
Well, my parents knew the headmaster there of the Royal School, who in fact produced the pantomimes.
And Andrew, you've been hearing these stories your whole life.
All my life, yes.
How special?
Incredibly special, and sort of rooted my father at such a young age to the whole Windsor royal connection.
And you've got your own royal connection as well,
I
haven't
do,
you?
I
Tell us
do,
your
Anita.
story.
I am chairman of the Royal Windsor Rose and Horticultural Society, and the society was founded by Queen Victoria in 1893, and every sovereign since then has been our patron. Now, I'm not chairman because I'm a gardener. In fact, I know nothing about gardening or horticulture at all, but the society got in trouble about 10 years ago with no members, and I was approached because my grandfather had been involved, and I was asked if I would help them out. And I'm a businessman, so together with a small team, we've managed to, reignite the society.
And you took a bouquet to the Queen.
I did. In fact, the summer show, the Royal Windsor Flower Show, has a unique competition class, which is a floral table display that the winner gets. The table display goes up to Her Majesty's breakfast table, and so as chairman, my job is to go up to the Windsor Castle, knock on the door, present the floral display, say Andrew Try, chairman of the Royal Windsor Rose and Horticultural Society, the floral display for Her Majesty's breakfast table.
And the Queen was there, and she actually invited you up to see the roses.
Exactly. So I was invited in.
Wonderful.
I wasn't expecting it, and got to present the bouquet to the Queen.
Wonderful
Completely
to hear both your stories. Thank you so much, Geoffrey and Andrew. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Anita. There's a documentary in that. My next guest is the actress and writer Dame Maureen Lipman. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. You were preparing to go on stage 10, 11 days ago when you heard the news that stopped so many of us in our tracks. So how did you react?
I had a premonition, Kirsty. I actually texted to a friend in Corrie. I think the Queen's going to die. Just had one of those strange experiences, and then I thought that the show would be cancelled. It was in Manchester. It was a one-woman show, and I didn't think anyone would play that night, but the directive came through that we were all to carry on. And all I can say is it's quite a harrowing show as well as humorous, but all I can say is it was very tender that night, because my reaction was immediately visceral. I just sobbed. And then literally the show had to go on.
You met the Queen. I mean, we talked about this at the Jubilee just a little bit. I mean, you met the Queen on six occasions. I mean, that's quite a lot of times to meet the Queen.
For a whole girl.
Yes, especially for a whole girl. How would you describe her when you go beyond what she very obviously was?
She's in her own skin. She's absolutely herself. She's a modest and a shy person, playing the part of somebody absolutely in charge of everything, as she was today.
Yes.
Because wasn't it beautifully?
Absolutely
Beautifully directed. You, of course, are not in your own skin, so you're just basically burbling. And I've burbled my way through at least 6 or 7 occasions. And I suppose I remember particularly the night she came to Oklahoma, which was her favourite show because I think she saw it on honeymoon. And so we, the cast of Oklahoma, were all called in for a 10:30 rehearsal in the morning, which is pretty unheard of. We've been playing for 6 months, Hugh Jackman and all the rest of us. And she came in the morning and we erected a barn and sang, "Oh, the farmer and the cowman should be friends," you know. And then that night, she came to see the show. Lunchtime, we had a lunch with her at the Ivy, just a few of us. And I didn't get to speak to her because I wasn't next to her. But as I left, she said to me, "I believe you're coming to see us at the Palace quite soon." And I said, "Yes, Ma'am, if I can find something to wear," you know, normally witty riposte, you know, blah, blah, blah. And that was in November. And in February, in my nice outfit, I made my little bob, and she said, "Well, I see you found something."
She did not.
She did.
I think that's extraordinary.
It is. She was an extraordinary woman, and we've lost the mother yeast of our daily bread, is how I put it. We've lost.
Well, I say it's extraordinary, not to be rude. I mean, of course she'd remember who you were, but when you were meeting the sheer volume of people that she was meeting as Queen, that's why it's extraordinary.
I think that was her little consolation prize, that she did those things, because in a sense she knew that it was a more important meeting to us than it was to
inevitably,
her. She was dazzling in every way and so photogenic. She couldn't take a bad photograph, could she?
She had the best. I only met her once, but the best skin I have ever seen. She was lit from within. I think.
She was, and she made that job into. You know, when you think of her courage, her sheer courage. Queen Victoria shut herself away for decades after the death of her beloved. She was out there again after a week, and the mundanity of the job, the boxes every day, you know, not like in The Crown, sort of, you know, from one crisis to another, just
plowing through.
The ribbon cutting, the shaking of the hands. An incredible woman doing an incredible job for 70 years. It's just, she led by example, didn't she, like the best of teachers?
There is a wonderful phrase, and I think it might have been in Robert Hardman's book about, you know, she visited the places that needed visiting and she thanked the people that needed thanking. And in that way, she made herself real, and she made people who were doing the things that contribute to the fabric of society feel that they were special. Of course they are special, because those are the things that matter. But I think in one way it was that sort of dogged determination to go to the places that are not glamorous.
Absolutely.
That really was
the least
something
snobbish of people, and the most courageous, because when you stand in an open top car and you do walkabouts, which she really introduced, there's a lot of strange people out there. I'm sometimes frightened when people suddenly approach you the way they do. She was very brave. You know, think about the intruder and the horse that bolted, all those things. She was really a warrior.
Also interesting, I think, to look at the way that she aged. There seemed to, and very interestingly, you know, people like Barack Obama and Justin Trudeau talking about the wisdom that came with her, that when they were able to have conversations, it wasn't just that they were meeting a sovereign, it wasn't just they were meeting a fellow head of state, they were meeting somebody who had a kind of institutional memory that went back 70 years, and that was invaluable to them. There's a lot of wisdom that comes with that experience.
So much wisdom and so much discretion. If you remember the blue and yellow flowers that were discreetly behind her after Russia had invaded Ukraine, she had a way of making her point, I think, which was unique. You know.
Dame Maureen Lipman, thank you for sharing your memories and thoughts. It's so nice to see you today.
Lovely to see you too. Thank you.
The state hearse still on its way, still with people on each side of the road, not going along the motorway, but coming through the ordinary main roads. It'll go through the town centres before it gets to Windsor. And at Windsor, in the chapel, much of the congregation already sitting waiting for this family funeral. People who were close to the Queen, worked for the Queen, many again with the Royal Victorian Order medal. And there'll be music played, but the service doesn't actually begin for another hour and a half, and that hour and a half will be taken up with the procession up the Long Walk. A procession very like the one we saw in London, with the pipes and the drums and the bands and all that sort of glorious jewel-like surrounding of the coffin as they come up the Long Walk and into this west door, under the huge window, one of the largest stained glass windows in Britain, and the coffin will be borne up the steps and into the nave. The music's going to be played. It's interesting, the music they're going to play. There's one particular composer who was the organist here at the chapel, who not only played the organ here, but has also provided music for the service itself. And he was here from the 30s until the 60s. The Queen herself used to go up into the organ loft there to listen to him play. And it's said that he actually taught Her Majesty the piano. Sir William Harris is called. But there's music also by Bach and Herbert Howells, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, modern music from Judy Weir, the current master of the King's Music, Elgar Vaughan Williams, all those famous British composers. But for the moment, it seems they sit in silence and just talk to each other. The banners of the Knights of the Garter. Now, interestingly, the 1000th Knight of the Garter, would you believe, was the Prince of Wales, who was Prince William then. He was appointed in 2008, the 1000th Knight of the Garter. It goes back centuries. And it's in the gift, or was in the gift of the sovereign, only given to people who've distinguished themselves in public life. Not all men. There are women, ladies of the Garter, they're called as well. And their banners hang here during their time when they're alive, when they come every year to this service here for the Garter, and then on their death the banner's taken down, but the seat that they have below in the choir, those brass plaques you can see, are there to commemorate their time as members of the order. There are 700 or 800 of them left here. Some have been taken down because history disapproved of them, others have just fallen down, but otherwise this extraordinary panoply of the Knights of the Garter, whose chapel this is. And the man responsible for all this is the most senior herald, Garter King of Arms, who made the principal proclamation of the King in St. James's Palace earlier this week, and here today will perform one of his final duties, which is to read out the Queen's styles and titles at the very end of the service. Garter King of Arms, and with the heralds, who nowadays play a mainly symbolic role at state occasions, but in the past were figures of controversy who had to decide who was entitled to call themselves what and who owned what land, and got caught up in all kinds of shenanigans. Now, as so many of the people that we see in the most brilliant colours here, enlivening these occasions, is actually there simply as a formal role which they play.
Now, someone who knows Windsor very well is the writer and historian William Shawcross. He's taken the time to join us. We're very grateful for that. You've spent a lot of time here. Sometimes it's been social times and sometimes it's been working times. We'll come to that in a second. But today, as somebody who spent a lot of time in the company of the Queen, What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't want to exaggerate and boast and say it was a lot, but I had an incredible honour from the Queen. She asked me to write the official biography of her mother.
And there was a 6-year period where
It
you,
was 6
you
years.
researched and wrote that.
Much of that time in this wonderful castle in the round tower behind us, which is where the Royal Archives are.
Right.
And it was an extraordinary joy to read all these letters that had never been written, probably since they were never been read for 50, 60 years.
But didn't you spend time consulting with the Queen and saying, this is what I found and what do you make of that and is that accurate? So you would take tea with her and you would exchange your research and ask for her opinion?
Yes, she would ask me to tea either here or sometimes at Balmoral if that was, my wife and I went to stay there several times. But you're right, and I would say, look at this letter, ma'am, do you remember this? And she would say, oh yes, this is why I wrote that, or this is why my mother wrote this to me, or to so-and-so. I got to know her. I was, as I say, very privileged, and I'm lucky to do so.
I mean, you're a very distinguished writer, but that must have been quite nerve-wracking.
It was, but nerve-wracking in theory, but actually the first time after I'd met her, I realized what an extraordinarily kind and gentle person she was, and she always put everybody at their ease. There was never any side to her. It was always gentle and wise and incredibly decent in every sense of the word.
So you had access to this archive and there were letters between the Queen and the very young Queen and the Queen Mother. I need to ask you a question that has been bothering me because I've read it in 2 or 3 books, which is, during the war, did the Queen Mother sign her letters tinkety-tonkled fruit and down with the Nazis?
She did.
She did?
She did. She didn't sign all her letters like that.
Okay.
If she was writing to the Queen, to Princess Elizabeth, she would say, with much love from your loving mamma.
Right.
But to friends and cousins, not all of them, and certainly not to a formal letter, she would say, tinkety-tonk and down with the Nazis.
Right.
And she had this wonderful habit of raising her glass to people she loved and say, let's now drink to Winston Churchill. And then raise our glasses to Winston Churchill, and let's lower our glasses to the Nazis. And others.
When you were a house guest, you stayed both here at Windsor, overnight stay, what were they called? Dine and sleeps, I think.
Dine and sleep was
Very
here
posh sleepover.
Yes, very posh, of course. Being asked to sleep here is very posh. One of the other guests who was there the night that my wife and I were here had a Canaletto in his bedroom. Well, that's pretty posh.
That is pretty posh.
Right. And beautiful.
And those events, I mean, I imagine, of course, because you already had this working relationship, not entirely nerve-wracking, but, you have to be careful to do and say the right thing. And notoriously, we have heard throughout this week that the Queen was the consummate hostess, that she worked very hard to put her house guests at their ease. Did you experience that?
Absolutely. There was one classic occasion when my wife and I were coming to stay the night, or the weekend actually, and the British Airways lost my wife's luggage. So she was crestfallen, as you can imagine.
I can.
But we arrived, and the Queen came to the door and said, I hear you've lost your luggage. I'm terribly sorry. But I've tried to arrange with the other ladies' guests and ladies in waiting and others to find some clothes for you. And so they did. And my wife had a very nice shirt from a lady in waiting and a skirt from someone else and a beautiful belt from a Polish maid.
Wonderful.
So it was fantastic.
Tell me then what your thoughts were today when you were watching the service, and not necessarily what do you expect them to be, but what is your sort of state of mind as somebody who is saying goodbye to somebody who was dear to them and who they knew?
I think the whole thing has been quite astonishingly beautiful and emotional, for not just for me, but I think the emotion of the whole country has been extraordinary to see over the last week. It's because people loved her. She'd been here for 70 years, and she loved us. What you've seen, I think, is a mixture of grief and gratitude on the part of the people in this last 7 days, and it's just fantastic, and it's very, very well deserved. The other thing, I think, which was mentioned several times in the service by the Archbishop and others, is that the Queen didn't think this was the end. She believes in resurrection. And I found, when I was doing my research, a lovely remark that she made in a speech in Australia, an Aboriginal proverb, which she said was enduring. And the proverb said, we are in this time and place for a short time to learn, to observe, to love, and then we go home.
That's a beautiful thought. William Shawcross, we thank you very much for sharing your memories and sharing all your thoughts, and it was very interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, To be chosen as the Sovereign's piper is a great honour. Anita, I think, is joined now by somebody who has held that role. Anita.
Yes, I'm with Jim Motherwell, who was appointed Piper to the Sovereign in 1997. What does that mean, Jim? What was the job?
The role of the job, you play the bagpipes every morning underneath the Queen's window from 9 till 9:15. Then you pack them away. Then you go and collect the Queen when she comes down from her private apartments at the lift, and you just stay with her, regarding what she's doing, interviews, visits, investitures. You basically work all day with her. And then when you're finished, you take her back round to the lift and she goes back upstairs to her private apartment.
What an incredible job to have.
It was very surreal.
Every single day you would play a tune on the bagpipe, same tune every day?
No, you not to repeat the tunes all week, and you get a lot of tunes into 15 minutes on the bagpipes.
Did you ever get requests?
Yeah, the Queen's got her favourite tunes, a lot of them. A couple that Pipe Major Burns, who's the present Queen's Piper, played today, and she used to ask for a tune called Dovecote Park because she remembered it from she was a princess at the end of the war.
And then you go up to Balmoral as well?
Balmoral's the best part of the year because I've got loads of duties, or I had loads of duties to do at Buckingham Palace. But once you get up to Balmoral, you play the bagpipes in the morning, you play at dinner in the evening, and during the day you go out horse riding, shooting, practicing your military training in case you ended up back in the regiment.
Not a bad life.
Yeah, it's
now, one
okay.
of the most poignant moments in the funeral service was when the piper played.
Oh, that was for me big time because the piper, Pipe Major Paul Burns, he's a very good player, but he's young and he's. I remember what that feeling was like, and I was more nervous for him today than I was when I played the Queen Mother out the church when she passed away nearly 20 years ago.
He did an amazing job though.
He did a fantastic job.
So if I were to ask you one enduring memory of the Queen, what would it be?
My wife was hurt in an accident at work in London, and she was quite badly hurt. And I had to take time off, compassionate time off, and then when I went back to work, the Queen asked how my wife was and how she was coping. And I said, there's no long-term injuries, but she's covered in bruises. So the Queen said, wait there. She went back upstairs in the lift, came back down and gave me a little
Ah.